Now, folks, we have to tighten it up. It's about as clear as I can be. The rules are very clear. 10 indoors, 25 outdoors. I'd like to make something very clear. That this Thanksgiving, we're asking that you spend the holiday with just your household. That means sitting down to dinner with only the people you live with.
All right, some mixed messaging there from the Ontario Premier this week as his province and others continue to face a surge in cases. What are the politics behind the confusion? Who should Canadians be listening to? It's Thursday, and I'm here with that issue. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal, Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Althea Raj is here in Ottawa. So the confusion this week, I'll start with you, Althea, has really been specific to Ontario. But at some point, does that require perhaps someone from the federal government to come out and sort of drop the hammer, particularly as we head into Thanksgiving weekend?
I'm going to answer the second question first. I don't think it requires Ottawa to get involved. I mean, these are basically provincial rules, so it's up to the provinces, and frankly, even within the provinces, local jurisdictions for us to listen to our political and also our health experts who tell us what we should be following. There's sometimes like funny moments and you need to find humor someplace. I think the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, basically highlighted to us just how confusing the rules are by saying that they were not confusing this week when he himself did not understand how many people he could have over at his house for Thanksgiving, saying that he was only going to have 10 people in, and that he'd made sure to tell his wife that he could only invite 10 people over for Thanksgiving dinner. And then he was informed, it's no longer 10. It's just the immediate people in your actual household. Yeah. So I think that highlights for everybody the fact that people are confused, especially Quebec and Ontario. The government is saying, stay home, stay with your immediate circle. But yet businesses are open and life continues as normal. So people are having to wonder why are we being told to stay home if life outside of our household continues as normal? If things were that serious, they would be shutting things down.
Yeah, and it's very high numbers in Manitoba. Well, high for Manitoba, high numbers again in Alberta. So it's not just in the two biggest provinces. Chantal, is there a province that is doing a better job at this during the second wave?
I'm guessing BC. They seem to have flattened that second wave faster than Ontario and Quebec, and they're having a provincial election. Yeah. But to your original question, should the federal government step in? Really, it's hard enough for premiers to decide which regions need to do what, and rightly so, because there are large areas in Ontario, Quebec, and other provinces that do not have the problems of Toronto, Montreal, or maybe Winnipeg. But imagine a federal prime minister trying to figure that out and issue orders. Good luck with that.
Well, but maybe not even issue orders, Andrew. Maybe just say you need to start limiting your circle. I mean, I would that message not be, I realize it's a regional pandemic, but would that message not need to be heard broadly?
I think, frankly, that would just simply add to the confusion. If you're adding in overlapping jurisdictions, which is perennial a problem in this country, where we're unsure of which level of government is responsible for what, I'm not sure that would be help. I actually cut some slack for any government at this moment in dealing with this. You're dealing with, unless your stance is that zero risk is acceptable, in which case you just shut everything down, and that's certainly simple, but it's also catastrophic and calamitous for the economy. Then if you're dealing with what level of risk is acceptable, well, that's going to vary from location to location, from region to region. It's going to change over time, and it's inevitable that you're not going to be able to get a perfect message out there. So as I say, I think in this difficult balancing act that people in public office have to do, where they're getting advice on the one hand from health authorities, but they're also having to think about the economic consequences and the different kinds of health risks that are associated with this, not just the risk from the pandemic, but the risk from a really severe economic shock in terms of lost jobs and suicides and everything else. Then I have some time for people who are trying to wrestle with this and trying to get a message out. I'm much more concerned about the substantive failings on things like testing. where it's quite shocking that we're still at such low levels of testing, than on the messaging question.
Okay, I wanted to do that topic because everyone is heading into the weekend thinking about it, but I also want to turn to some comments from the Prime Minister today. We're also all, of course, watching the political story south of the border, and the Prime Minister was asked about the U.S. election a couple times today. Here's what he said.
I think we're certainly all hoping for a smooth transition or a clear result from the election, like many people are around the world. If it is less clear, there may be some disruptions, and we need to be ready for any outcomes. And I think that's what Canadians would expect of their governments, and we're certainly reflecting on that.
So what does that tell us, if anything, Althea, about the reflections happening inside his office, about the things that we're all thinking about in regards to this election?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's office, just like many Americans and people in capitals across the world, frankly, are concerned that on election night, it will appear like Donald Trump has won a sweeping majority of a mandate. And then weeks later, we will discover potentially that actually Vice President Biden has won the election. And I think that, for the first time, and we saw this through access to information request in 2015 and 2016, the government was completely ill-prepared, had actually not even seemed to consider the possibility that Donald Trump might win the election, had no plans at all. Foreign Affairs was rushing to find out what the president-elect had actually said on the campaign trail because they were ill-equipped. This is not the case this time. They are prepared for a variety of scenarios, and I think that's good for us. It is interesting. I mean, it is the first time that he has gone so far as to declare an opinion or talk about contingency plans that the government has with regards to the U.S. election.
Well, or to recognize that we may not have an answer on election night, Chantal.
Or to recognize that we would really, really like to have a clear answer on election night. Because I think if you put it in order, a decisive result would be the first thing. And I don't think that's just the Liberals. I think it cuts across the political class.
Yeah.
A decisive result, preferably a decisive Biden victory, which is not something that you're going to hear anyone saying out loud. But if you look at any polls in any country, Europe, it's overwhelming, and so is Canada. But to have the worst is a result that is not clear. And at this point, it is a possibility. I'm not sure you can really prepare for that, except to tell people not to say anything unless it becomes clear that whoever is winning is winning.
Yeah.
But it is the last worst scenario for anyone, anywhere outside the U.S.
I realize the circumstances are vastly different, but I mean, we have experienced it before with Bush and Gore, Andrew, and everyone sort of had to cool their jets for a while in terms of saying anything.
This is many multiples worse than that, potentially. When you look at the scenarios, when you look at the president's refusal to publicly state that he would accept anything but his own victory, that he would accept a peaceful transition of power on a day when, 13 people have been arrested in a plot allegedly to kidnap the governor of Michigan. When you look at some of the scenarios where Trump is encouraging people, his supporters, to think that the election was stolen from them, many of those supporters are armed. We should not kid ourselves about the potential for really hideous outcomes beyond just weeks and months of paralysis in the United States, but civil disorder. So, as Chantal said, what exactly you can plan for in Canada to deal with that, I don't know, except to say one thing, which is I would imagine there'd be heavy pressure on other countries from Trump to recognize his quote-unquote victory. And I hope that the countries of the sort of civilized world, if I can put it that way, are consulting with each other and will greet that with a unanimous or a collective no. But there'll be a lot of pressure put on, I would think.
Tonight, we have to recognize that this is an historic moment. We, as Greens, once again, are leading the way. We have done something that has never been done before in Canadian politics. And I congratulate us.
That's Annamie Paul, the new leader of the Green Party of Canada, speaking last Saturday night. She's the country's first black leader of a national federal party. But the Green Party is hoping that to make more inroads, of course, with this new leader. Let's talk to Chantal, Andrew, and Althea about this. I mean, it's interesting and historic for many reasons, obviously, but it's also interesting to see whether the Green Party can redefine itself in some way without Elizabeth May, who's been at its helm for so long. Chantal, what do you make of Annamie Paul's win and what that might tell us?
I think it was an interesting win and probably eventually an interesting addition to the House of Commons. Now, that being said, it has been Elizabeth May's party in many ways, and it will remain that in as much as Elizabeth May has a seat in the House of Commons and will actually be the go-to person in Parliament while her leader is sitting outside Parliament. I also note that in New Brunswick, but also possibly in BC, the Green Party, which had some share of the balance of power, maybe actually on the way to losing that.
Yeah, it does seem like the Green Party had a moment and that the moment sort of faded away. And I wonder if Annamie Paul can revive it in some way, Andrew.
Well, it was a victory for the more mainstream-oriented sections of the Green Party in relative terms. I mean, they're obviously a party that's well out to the left, but there were candidates running in this race who would have taken it much further into the weeds, and I think made it much less electable than it could be. But I think a lot of that happened under Elizabeth May. On the one hand, it became very much a personality cult or a vehicle for her personality or a very larger-than-life personality. And on the other hand, it also became a much less interesting party intellectually. You go back 8-10 years, the Green Party was kind of a subversive. It was hard to categorize in left-right terms. It was environmentally oriented, but it also had interesting policies in terms of free markets. Mm-hmm. And it became much less interesting and much more hard to distinguish from the NDP or today the left of the Liberal Party than it might otherwise have been. So that's one of the things they're going to have to dealing with is the Liberals have moved so far to the left and the NDP with them that it's going to be harder for the Greens to carve out unique territory for themselves in that very crowded field.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of what the challenge is, right, Althea? The fact that they rejected going further left, but now how do they distinguish themselves as more moderate amongst progressive?
But they don't want to be moderate among progressives. I think that, I mean, Andrew's right. This was a battle between the eco-socialists and the more centrist candidates. But there's these centrist candidates, and Annamie Paul would be one of them, they were still to the left of like the Harris Greens from the 90s and even the early years of Elizabeth May. This party now is really after NDP supporters. Traditionally, it gets Liberal voters, and you see that even if you look at the electoral map, like when the Liberals do well, like in 2015, for example, the Green vote collapsed, and they did fairly decent in 2019, although they only won 3 seats, but they had more than 1 million votes. I mean, that's a lot of people who cast a ballot for the Greens. Mm-hmm. But it was a climate election. Now we're talking about COVID. We're talking about the economy. Will people go to the ballot box with climate in mind? And Annamie Paul has already started to bring that conversation to not just be about climate. She's talking about a guaranteed livable income. She's talking about a national inquiry into long-term care homes. Can the Greens really steal enough votes from the New Democrats? I mean, the left is very crowded. I think that was to Andrew's point. And I'm not sure how the Greens managed to move their vote from this like thin slice across the country to key seats without a change in the way that we elect members of parliament.
Chantal wants one last word there. Yes, Chantal.
I still think that her victory versus the alternative is not good news for the NDP. You've got the Liberals trying to move in on them on the right of the left, and then the Green Party. I also think that it would be best for her to get to the House of Commons quickly, and the quickest way would be for Ms. May to relinquish her seat for her.
Ah, interesting. Andrew, the likelihood of that happening?
She seemed more intent on trying to shame the NDP into paving the way for her by saying, well, you should just simply not run candidates. I think that's a tradition, if it was, that candidates have outgrown.
in Toronto Centre, to be clear.
Yeah,
not
yeah.
like
Yes,
just,
but I've
again,
looked,
enemy Paul.
every seat where someone has declined to run, for instance, the Liberals against Stephen Harper or Joe Clark when they came back, were seats that party,
They held, yes.
the Conservatives held. No party has ever said, we're going to give you one of our seats.
No.
So the seat to give, frankly, would be Elizabeth May's seat.
Well, it's
Nor
possible
should-
Ms. May is
nor
saying
should
that
they-
in order to distract from that request. Andrew, last
Well,
word
and-
to you. Yeah.
Well, they shouldn't feel obliged to. It's up to the voters to decide who is elected an MP, not some deal among the parties.
Okay, I got to leave it there this week. Look, we talked a lot of politics in that segment. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.